Angela was born in a small neighborhood in Accra to her mother, Janet. From the moment she was born, her life was filled with pain and loneliness. Her mother, Janet, treated her with cruelty, never showing any warmth or kindness. Every day was a reminder to Angela that she was unwanted. Janet blamed her for everything that had gone wrong in her life and made sure Angela knew it. Janet had never wanted to be a mother. She had big dreams when she was younger, dreams of becoming a successful businesswoman in Accra. Janet worked at a local bank and had her eyes set on climbing the corporate ladder. She enjoyed her independence, her job, and the freedom to live life on her own terms. Children were never part of her plan. In her mind, they would only hold her back from reaching her goals. So when she found out she was pregnant, it felt like the end of everything she had worked for. To make matters worse, the baby's father abandoned her the moment he learned about the pregnancy. With her career on hold and no one to lean on, Janet grew to resent the baby growing inside her. The idea of becoming a mother felt like a prison. By the time Angela was born, all Janet felt was bitterness. Every time she looked at her daughter, she saw the life she had lost, the dreams she had abandoned. Angela became a constant reminder of everything that had gone wrong. Instead of love, Janet showed her daughter cold indifference, anger, and sometimes even hatred. As Angela grew older, the maltreatment became more obvious. Janet never showed her any affection or kindness. She would shout at Angela for the smallest mistakes, calling her names and telling her she was worthless. "You are the reason my life is ruined," she would say. Janet never hugged her, never said a kind word, and never listened to Angela's needs. At home, Angela felt more like a burden than a child. She did all the housework, even when she was too young to handle the chores. Angela had to clean, cook, and wash clothes, while other children her age were outside playing or studying. If she made any mistake, her mother would punish her severely, sometimes locking her in her room without food for hours. When Angela came home from school, excited to show her mother something she had done, Janet would ignore her or tell her she had no time for such nonsense. "Why are you so annoying? Can't you just be quiet and stay out of my way?" Janet would say, when Angela tried to ask her anything. Angela learned to stay quiet and not bother her mother. Angela grew up feeling unloved, unwanted, and always longing for the love she saw other children receive from their mothers. At school, Angela tried to hide her pain. She would watch her classmates being hugged and kissed by their parents and wonder why her mother didn't love her like that. She would often sit alone during break time, wishing she could feel the warmth and care that other children had. Over time, Angela became quiet and withdrawn, unsure of her place in the world. This was the life Angela lived, a life without a mother's love, full of loneliness and harsh treatment. She would cry herself to sleep at night, wondering why her mother hated her so much. She wished for a mother who would show her love, but she slowly realized that it would never happen. The pain in her heart grew heavier every day, as she longed for a normal relationship with her mother. One day, when Angela was about 18 years old, Janet made a decision that would change Angela's life forever. Janet had been struggling financially. She had lost her job and had squandered most of her savings. She needed money fast, and that's when Mr. Wilson, a wealthy businessman, entered the picture. One afternoon, as Janet strolled through the bustling streets of Accra, she bumped into an old friend from her youth. They caught up quickly before her friend turned and gestured to the man beside her. "Janet, meet Mr. Wilson," she said with a smile. Mr. Wilson was a wealthy businessman in Accra, known for his vast empire and influence. But despite his money, he carried a deep worry. "Janet," he began, his voice low, "I have a son, John. He's, well, struggling, and I've just received news that I don't have much time left." He sighed, his gaze drifting off. "I need someone to look after him when I'm gone. Someone outside my circle." Janet's eyes narrowed. "What are you proposing, Mr. Wilson?" He hesitated, glancing around before speaking. "If you know someone who could become John's wife, I'd make it worth their while." Janet's mind raced. seeing the opportunity for what it was, a chance to secure a fortune. She barely hesitated before making her decision. "I have someone in mind, actually. My daughter, Angela." Mr. Wilson looked surprised but nodded approvingly. Janet barely thought twice about how Angela would feel. The money was what mattered, and Angela was her ticket to it. When Janet arrived home, she found Angela and immediately laid out the arrangement, her voice cold and detached. "You're going with Mr. Wilson. You're marrying his son, John." Angela's face fell, her heart shattering as the weight of her mother's words sank in. She searched Janet's eyes, hoping to find a trace of motherly warmth. There was none. "But my future, my happiness." Angela's voice was barely a whisper. Janet shrugged. "This is about survival. The money he's offering will keep us secure. Don't be selfish." With no choice, Angela resigned herself to her fate. The wedding was a small, traditional ceremony. Only Janet, Mr. Wilson, and a handful of guests were present. And just like that, Angela found herself bound to a life she hadn't chosen, a pawn in a game orchestrated by the very person who was supposed to protect her. John had lived a lonely life, even though he was the son of a wealthy man. Growing up in Accra, he had everything money could buy: expensive toys, the best schools, and a large house. But none of these things filled the emptiness in his heart. John's mother had passed away when he was very young, and his father, Mr. Wilson, was always busy with his business. Mr. Wilson loved his son, but he was often away on trips or in meetings, leaving John to grow up without much attention or affection. Without his mother's love and with his father hardly around, John found comfort in food. When he was sad or lonely, he would eat. Whenever he felt unloved or abandoned, he would eat some more. Over the years, John gained a lot of weight and became obese. His weight made him even more miserable. He couldn't participate in activities that other kids his age enjoyed, like playing football or going out with friends. Instead, he stayed at home, eating and growing more bitter. By the time he was an adult, John had become so large that he needed help with his activities of daily living. He also developed a tough shell around himself to cope with the negative way people treated him. He was grumpy, rude, and hard to be around. He believed that no one would ever love him because of his size, and he didn't try to make friends. Even his father, Mr. Wilson, struggled to connect with him. Mr. Wilson was worried about John's future, especially now that he was diagnosed with a terminal illness. He knew he didn't have much time left, and he feared what would happen to John when he was gone. Mr. Wilson wanted someone to care for John after he died, but finding someone willing to marry his son was almost impossible. John was difficult to deal with, and his large size made people uncomfortable. No one in their wealthy social circle wanted to marry him. That's when Mr. Wilson came up with a plan to find someone from a less privileged background. When Angela arrived at Mr. Wilson's house, she carried more than just her bags. She carried the weight of her past and the longing for something, anything, that might fill the void of her life. But John's reaction shattered any hopes she had for warmth or companionship. As she stepped through the door of the large shadowed house, John's icy glare met her like a wall. His eyes held no welcome, only contempt, and she knew immediately that life here would be just as cold and empty as the one she had left behind. The arrangement that brought her here wasn't made out of love or mutual respect. Mr. Wilson had agreed to this union for reasons she didn't fully understand, and John saw her as a paid inconvenience, a burden forced into his life without his consent. "I don't know what you're expecting, but don't get comfortable," John had said to her that first night, his tone as sharp as broken glass. He didn't try to hide his disdain. Every day Angela tried to fulfill her role as best she could, hoping to win him over in small ways. She cooked his favorite dishes, ironed his clothes with extra care, and waited for a hint of appreciation, even if it was just a nod or a glance that wasn't filled with bitterness. But John remained closed off, emotionally locked behind walls that Angela felt she could never breach. Their interactions were brief and cold. If she ventured to say something in the mornings, perhaps a simple "good morning" or "did you sleep well?" he would often answer with curt replies or ignore her entirely, immersing himself in his breakfast or phone or both. One morning, after she had prepared a hearty breakfast, hoping the smell of fresh bread and eggs might soften his mood, he had looked at her plate and then back at her with a frown. "Why do you even bother with this?" he muttered, pushing the plate away. "I don't need you doing this for me. I prefer to handle things myself." Angela stood silent, holding back the hurt that threatened to spill out in tears. "I just thought it might make things better." His sharp look cut her off before she could finish, as though even speaking to him was an offence. "Better? You think some breakfast is going to make this situation better?" Every night followed the same sad routine. Angela would eat alone in the small kitchen, trying to find some comfort in the silence. John would take his meals in his room, emerging only for necessities, treating her presence like an inconvenience. Despite all her attempts, his heart remained a locked room with no key. Angela would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if this was the life she was destined for. Always looking in from the outside, a stranger in her own home. Yet Angela found herself unable to give up entirely. Despite the rejection, the loneliness, and the pain, she clung to a small flicker of hope. Perhaps if she found a way to reach him, to break through the wall he had built around himself, she might finally find a way to escape her own misery. But as the weeks turned into months, and John's anger turned to indifference, Angela began to wonder if there was any hope left at all, or if she was simply trading one prison for another, in a life where love was as distant as a dream. Over time, however, something began to change. Angela, unlike anyone else in John's life, didn't give up on him. She noticed that underneath his rude and grumpy behavior, there was deep sadness and pain. She knew what it felt like to be unloved, and she understood his loneliness. Little by little, she started to talk to John, sharing her own story of growing up without love. At first, John didn't want to hear it, but as time passed, he realized that Angela knew what he was going through. She wasn't just there for the money. She understood his pain. One day, after another argument, John finally opened up to Angela. He told her about how he ate to comfort himself because he had no one. "Food is the only thing that makes me feel better," he said quietly. "When my mother died, I felt like no one cared. And my father, he was never around." Angela listened, and for the first time John felt like someone actually cared about him. Slowly, the walls between them began to come down. John started to eat less and spend more time with Angela. They found they had something in common, the feeling of growing up without love. This shared pain brought them closer, and what started as an arranged marriage began to turn into friendship, and then into love. As John spent more time with Angela, his attitude improved, and he began to change. His love for her grew, and he no longer found comfort in food. With Angela's encouragement, John started to eat healthier, and he even began exercising. He wanted to be better for her and for himself. Seeing John's transformation filled Mr. Wilson with hope. He was happy to see his son finally finding love and happiness, something he had feared would never happen. Mr. Wilson, who knew that his time was running out, decided to change his will. Originally, he had made someone else the beneficiary of his estate with the hope that that person will take care of John. But now, seeing how much Angela had helped John and how they had fallen in love, Mr. Wilson realized that his wealth should go to his son and daughter-in-law. He wanted to leave everything to John and Angela so they could continue building their life together. He called his lawyer and made arrangements for a meeting the following day. But the next morning, everything went wrong. Mr. Wilson suddenly fell very ill and had to be rushed to the hospital before he could sign the new will. He was too weak to speak, and his condition got worse quickly. Within a few days, he passed away. Angela and John were heartbroken. As soon as Mr. Wilson passed away, everything in John and Angela's life seemed to fall apart. They had just started to build a happy life together, and John had changed so much for the better. Mr. Wilson's death was hard on both of them, but they found comfort in each other. They believed that despite the sadness, they had a future ahead of them. They were confident that Mr. Wilson had left his estate to John, as his only son, and to Angela, who had helped John change his life. But one morning, not long after the funeral, Janet, Angela's mother, showed up at their house in Accra. She arrived without any warning. Angela was shocked to see her mother, as they hadn't spoken much since Janet had given her away to Mr. Wilson. John didn't like her either. He knew how cold and greedy she had always been. Janet walked into the house as if she owned it, not even bothering to greet Angela or John properly. She looked around at the beautiful home with an air of confidence and said, "This house belongs to me now." Angela and John were surprised. They stood frozen, not understanding what she meant. "What are you talking about?" Angela asked. "This is John's house. His father left everything to us." Janet laughed coldly. "You think so, huh? Mr. Wilson made me the beneficiary of his will. This house, all his money and his business are now mine. You two will have to leave." John's heart sank. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. How could his father give everything to Janet? It didn't make sense. Mr. Wilson had promised to take care of them, especially after seeing how much John had changed. But now Janet was standing there, claiming everything they thought was theirs. Angela felt a wave of disbelief and anger rise inside her. How could her own mother betray her like this? Janet had abandoned her, sold her to Mr. Wilson for money, and now she was back to take everything from them. "No, this can't be true," Angela said, her voice trembling. "Mr. Wilson would never do that." But Janet remained calm and confident. "Oh, but he did," she said with a smile. "Before he died, he changed his will. He made me the sole beneficiary. He thought I would take care of John, but I don't have to do that anymore. I'm here to claim what's mine." John, still in shock, managed to speak. "My father would never leave me with nothing," he said, trying to process everything. He promised to take care of us." Janet shrugged. "Promises don't mean much when the will is on my side," she said. "You two need to start packing your things." John and Angela couldn't believe it. The house they had been living in, the home they thought would be theirs, was now being taken away from them. Angela felt sad. She had thought, even after all the pain Janet had caused her, that maybe her mother had changed. But Janet was still the same, cold, selfish, and greedy. In the days that followed, the will was read, and Janet tried to take full control of everything. She contacted lawyers, ready to kick John and Angela out of the house and take all the money and property for herself. John, who was devastated by his father's death and this betrayal, couldn't believe that his own home was slipping out of his hands. But Angela wasn't ready to give up. She knew that Mr. Wilson had wanted John to inherit his estate. Angela and John decided to fight back. They hired their own lawyer and took the case to court, determined to stop Janet from taking everything that rightfully belonged to them. The battle ahead was not going to be easy, but John and Angela had each other. They had survived so much pain and hardship together, and they weren't going to let Janet's greed destroy their future. In court, the truth slowly came out. During the legal battle, John and Angela's lawyer dug deep into the situation and uncovered how Janet had tricked Mr. Wilson. Their lawyer worked hard to show that Mr. Wilson had been manipulated by Janet when he was sick and vulnerable. He argued that Mr. Wilson had always intended for John to inherit his wealth and estate, especially after seeing the positive changes in his life thanks to Angela's love and care. Angela felt a mixture of anger and sadness. Her mother had always treated her badly, but this was a new level of cruelty. Janet had not only abandoned her, but now wanted to take everything away from her and her husband. As the evidence of Janet's manipulation was presented in court, the judge could see clearly what had happened. In the end, the court ruled in favor of John and Angela. The judge declared that Janet had taken advantage of Mr. Wilson in his weak state, and that his true intention had been to leave everything to his son and daughter-in-law. John and Angela were officially granted full ownership of the estate, and Janet's claims were rejected. Janet, who thought she would get away with everything, was left with nothing. Her plan had failed, and her greed had cost her everything. After the court case was settled, John and Angela were finally able to live in peace. They inherited the house and all of Mr. Wilson's wealth, just as he had intended. John continued to grow stronger, both physically and emotionally. With Angela by his side, he became a healthier and happier person. Their love for each other deepened, and they built a life full of joy and security in Accra, far away from the pain of their past. However, life didn't go well for Janet. Without the wealth she had tried to steal, she quickly fell into hardship. She had no savings, no job, and no one to turn to for help. The money she had gotten from Mr. Wilson for giving Angela away had been spent long ago on things that didn't matter. Now, with nothing left, she found herself struggling to survive. Janet became destitute, living in poor conditions. She had lost everything: her money, her pride, and even her daughter. As time went on, her health began to fail. She became seriously ill and was admitted to a public hospital in Accra. There, lying alone in a small hospital bed, Janet had no visitors and no one to care for her. The same people she had once counted on had abandoned her, just as she had abandoned Angela. One day, Angela heard from a family friend about her mother's situation, despite all the pain Janet had caused her. Angela decided to visit her mother in the hospital. She didn't want to, but deep down she felt it was the right thing to do. After all, Janet was still her mother, even if she had never acted like it. When Angela arrived at the hospital, she saw Janet lying in bed, looking older and more fragile than she had ever seen her. She felt pity for the woman who had caused her so much pain. When Janet saw Angela, she was overcome with emotion. Her eyes filled with tears. "Angela," she whispered, "I'm so sorry. I know I've hurt you. I know I don't deserve anything from you, but I'm all alone now. Please, I want us to be together again." Angela stood quietly. She had waited her whole life to hear something like this from Janet, but now she realized that her mother's apology wasn't enough to undo the years of pain. But she didn't feel the anger anymore. She had built a new life for herself with John, and she had found happiness. "I forgive you," Angela said quietly, "but I can't forget." Angela paid for her mother's medical bills, ensuring that she would get the care she needed. However, Angela knew that her life with John was where she belonged now. She didn't want to rebuild a relationship with Janet. The wounds of the past were too deep to heal completely. Janet, left with her regrets, lived the rest of her days reflecting on the choices she had made. She had lost everything: her daughter's love, her wealth, and her health, because of her own greed and selfishness. As for Angela and John, they continued to build a happy life together. With the wealth they inherited from Mr. Wilson, they started several businesses in Accra, using their resources to help others. They never forgot where they came from, and the painful experiences of their past only made them stronger. In the end, Angela realized that she didn't need her mother's love to be whole. She had created her own family with John, and together they faced the future with strength and love. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more great content. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so drop a comment below and let me know what you think. And don't forget to share this video with someone who might enjoy it too. See you in the next one.